Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on India's national television channel Doordarshan about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations and crucial developments in different regions and parts of the world that have a bearing on India's rise. Viewers, this is a special episode coming to you from the campus of OP Jindal Global University in Sonipat, Haryana, with a focus on geopolitical developments and their ramifications. Geopolitics is as old as history, and it goes back since the era of empires and nation states until today. But we are witnessing a kind of a resurgence of geopolitics, and we are going to be discussing this phenomenon in all its aspects with a group of very talented and outstanding young students of international affairs from OP Jindal Global University. Students, welcome to Indian Diplomacy. In the year 2014, Walter Russell Mead, one of the top American scholars, wrote an opinion piece in Foreign Affairs magazine. It's titled The Return of Geopolitics. And what he was arguing was that essentially the era of so-called liberal peace or coexistence among major powers has ended, and we are now entering a fierce era of rivalry, competition, and jostling for influence in different parts of the world among major powers. And he was writing that at the time when Russia had taken Crimea from Ukraine, and China had started to push back in a big way against the United States. And so you had that context where great power rivalry seemed to be returning with a bang. And in hindsight, more than 10 years have passed. It seems like his view was absolutely accurate. In fact, this geopolitical turn or return seems to be even more intensifying today. We have seen so many wars, conflicts raging around the world, and that tussle, that sense of a clash between major powers, global as well as regional, is increasing as we speak. So let's start the discussion by, reflecting on why you think this is happening. Why has geopolitics returned? Because we were supposed to be in this post-Cold War period after 1991, where the United States was the only leader and everybody else would follow the US-led liberal world order. There will be rules and everyone knows their limitations and nobody trespasses, and it would be a long peace. It was supposed to be a long peace, but this has been shattered now. So I want some of you to come in and reflect on why you think geopolitics is back. This contestation and rivalry about control and influence of key geographical areas of the world, which is geopolitics. Why is this concept booming again? And what do you think is the fundamental reason behind it? Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Pratignya Commander Sreeram, and I am studying in political science, and I'm majoring in that degree. And I believe that what the global order has understood is that the liberal order is not sustainable in any way. When we understood geopolitics decades ago, we understood geopolitics in terms of America, in terms of a Western agenda. And now strategic influence is focusing on the other of the West. So we're understanding what other countries want, Indo-Pacific, or let me just coin it as what the East wants, right? Because there has been a rise in power of China, Russia, India. Then we need to understand what geopolitics is, maximizing a state's power, influence, and security. And if America dominates this any longer, then it's neo-colonization.
So you're saying there's a pushback against Western domination, which is the fundamental reason why geopolitics has returned. As in, people are not willing to succumb to Western hegemony, and yes, that's why it's happening.
Exactly.
Any other views on this matter? Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Shreyanshi Sakaria. I'm pursuing BA Honours in Global Affairs. I think the fundamental reason is more to do with how multilateral institutions as a whole are proving to be a failure, because it is being dominated by 5 major countries who are the permanent members of the Security Council, and they can use their veto powers at their own disposal, at their own will, without any backlash on them, or they don't actually face any consequences for using their veto powers in their favor. So the other countries feel like they don't have any power, or they are subjected to what these countries want, which is why every country is at their own and doing what they want instead of just following the global order.
The rules-based order. Yeah, multilateral institutions are weak, but it's like a chicken and egg question, right? Are they weak because geopolitics has returned, or is geopolitics back because multilateral institutions are weak? Maybe the causation is two ways. Any other views on the return of geopolitics? Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Delisha Rao. I'm studying BA Diplomacy and Foreign Policy. I think the return of geopolitics can be owed to the rise of China and the resurgence of Russia, which both reject parts of the liberal international order and are both very powerful states. Now, China wants to reshape the international system with its authoritarian model and its capitalist system, whereas you see Russia now trying to revise these territorial arrangements in its near abroad, as we see in Crimea and Ukraine, right? And now these all are moves of hard power, and they all operate in the spheres of influence. And this is moves of classic geopolitics. Now you ask another question, why is the liberal international order failing, right? Because I think it failed to benefit everybody equally. It was built around US interests, Western institutions, and it failed to involve everybody equally, and especially countries in the global south. And it sidelined them. So now that they're also seeking influence and they're also seeking power, it has failed because of this. And I feel that another point is that other countries resented Western hypocrisy. And because they violated the rules that they made. They violated the very rules that they promoted as a rules-based international system. So I feel like it failed under the weight of its own contradictions.
Okay, good. So many of you are saying this is a pushback against unipolar US and Western-led order, which was not fair and equitable, which also makes us wonder, is multipolarity, meaning more power centers emerging, in itself inherently unstable? Because that creates this contestation and conflict. Because earlier it was not there, at least in the 1990s and for the first 2 decades after the end of the Cold War, it was not there. Now the pushback also means more conflict, right? So I want to come to the issue of conflict and rivalry. Some people say that, the urge to create a balance of power is universal and eternal, and it has always existed. So they say that the post-1990s order was just an aberration, like maybe a fluke that would not last for too long. And that it is the inherent tendency of big powers to always compete and to vie for influence against each other. And now that has come back. So in a way, they are saying that, it's like the return not just of geopolitics, but of the traditional historical pattern. But it's also leading to more violence and war, as we are seeing today, right? So on one hand, it may look like we are trying to redress an unfair or unjust old system, the liberal order. But what is replacing it seems to be like anarchy, where these revisionist powers, the ones you have mentioned, like China, Russia, they are on the attack, and they want to revise it using physical force, brutality, violence, and intimidation, right? So whatever their justification, what it means is we are also seeing more conflict. So is this inevitable, or could we have done something to accommodate all these powers and maybe stretch the long piece instead of it just ending with a shock in the last few years, and we are entering into this new turbulent so-called new Cold War? So what I'd like to ask some of you to come in is this new Cold War, especially China versus US and Russia being a much smaller player, but also challenging the US and Europe. Is this inevitable, or could it have been prevented? And by the way, people asked the same question during the original Cold War also. Remember, after World War II, China, the Soviet Union, United States, France, Britain, all of them were on the same side. They were the allied powers, right? But within like 4 or 5 years after the end of the war, you start this new, confrontation, the Cold War, right? And at the time also the question was this inevitable, or could it have been prevented had, people, for example, at that time, the counterfactual was, suppose Franklin Delano Roosevelt did not die. He had apparently a very close and affable personal chemistry with the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. And maybe they could have worked it out. We don't know. These are counterfactuals. So people say maybe if the US had been more accommodative, but then the counter argument is that the Soviet Union was inherently expansionist, so it would not have accepted anything less than a complete sphere of influence, and therefore Cold War is inevitable. So I'm asking now, today, again, you see clash of the big powers, this geopolitical rivalry. Is this inevitable, or could it have been prevented?
Hi, sir. My name is Sahaj Pandir. I'm a student of Masters in Diplomacy, Law and Business first year. Right, to answer your question, I would say it is inevitable, not just because it's happening and it's convenient to answer to that, but the fact that this conflict is essentially a result of chaos generated out of randomness. And why do we have randomness? Is firstly because for the first time in the global order, we're seeing how domestic politics is having a major influence in international politics. How Trump's, re-entrance and dominance in the administration has played a huge role in how foreign policy around the United States has functioned, and how relations with China or other actors like India have essentially influenced the same. We've seen how domestic politics largely influenced international politics, and even in Bangladesh's scenario. And so, just to I'm unable to recall the name, but there's a political philosopher who says little authority is never enough. People will always advocate for more power, and that is also something John Mearsheimer said when they propounded the theory of offensive realism, that authorities or states would want to maximize their powers. They are not defensive maximizers. So for that context, I think it's important to understand where states come from, because if they always prioritize their national interest, and if administrations keep on changing, their national interests keep on changing, there will be conflict, and it is bound to be
Good
happening.
Point, yeah. National interest, domestic factors, nationalism is also back, isn't it? And it's fueling a lot of the geopolitics, because nobody wants to be seen to be number 2 to anyone, and there is this rush to prove that I'm the best or I'm equal to the best. Russia is the classic example, right? I mean, Russia is economically very weak. It's hardly a $2 trillion economy. It has a legacy of being a great power, but no longer is a great power. It has a large military arsenal, but it wants to return and to be accepted as a great power. And there's this, nationalism within Russia to want to reclaim the past glory. And China, it's even higher, like the hyper-nationalism and all that mobilized under President Xi Jinping. Okay, more views on whether this is inevitable? Yes, please.
Hello sir, I am Gargi Mishra. I am a master's student from Masters in Diplomacy, Law and Business. So to answer your question, I believe that the Cold War is not inevitable, but it would bring a big structural change in the international order, because I believe that there are many economists and political thinkers who are talking about the US policy of decoupling or de-risking China. So all of them are talking about that it would be a very big threat to US economy itself if US bring into the idea of decoupling with China, which is complete separation. So they will follow the engagement process with China and America, but the idea is to reduce the vulnerability which America can face with this partnership with China. And also you mentioned about the idea of nationalism, which is a very growing phenomena in the global south country. And this whole tariff situation in the present context give a situation to the global south country where they have to bring more resilience to their domestic and the international structure in terms of economics, where they make their economy more strong and less vulnerable to the effect of this China and America's Cold War rivalry, which might occur in the given context.
Right, so interdependence is risky now because it could be weaponized, and instead you go for self-reliance or small groups of coalitions or alliances, and you are part of one club and then you're opposed to another club. That is how the Cold Wars happen, right? Like ultimately that's how decoupling is a very important point. The US-China interdependence is likely to now come down as a result of this ongoing trade war. And that does show the stark divisions between the major powers. Okay, now let's go to some theaters. Now, so far we've been talking generally about, why geopolitics is back and why, there's so much fierce rivalry and contestation. Let's go to some of the, different parts of the world where this is playing out. Let's start with our own backyard, which is the Indo-Pacific. This concept has caught on, especially in the last 10 years. Parallel to the advent of this return of geopolitics is the popularization of the concept of Indo-Pacific. It was not there before, right? And India itself plays a very central role in this region, but there are also other players. And it is a subject to intense rivalry and contestation. There's no doubt about it. There's so many players there with their militaries, with their economies, with their soft power game, all of them trying to have influence in this region. It's a hotly, the competition is very hot here in this region. So, and some are afraid of war breaking out in the Indo-Pacific. And this is something I want you to all come and weigh in on. There are some flashpoints which are considered high risk for wars, if not all-out great power wars, then maybe proxy wars through their local partners and allies in the region. And the likelihood of armed conflict or a limited war is not so low as it used to be before. We are seeing there is a brinkmanship and people getting closer and closer to potential, the face-offs are now becoming like near misses. And there are a lot of what they called unplanned encounters at sea and so on that are happening in the Indo-Pacific. Let's focus on the Indo-Pacific. Is there a likelihood of war? And if so, what is the main flashpoint that is likely to emerge, which could be the basis for all-out or limited armed conflicts?
Hello, Professor. My name is Ira Bikram. I am in my final year of Masters in Diplomacy, Business and Law. And to start with your question, I think war depends on one's definition in this arena. I feel like in the context of South China Sea, for example, the tussle between Beijing and Manila, where Manila calls it a sort of, an infringement on their water territories, whereas Beijing calls it more like a skirmish, where they have a dispute over the 9-dash line that they claim towards. So I feel that war is, it's already happening, but in different ways. The traditional set of military sort of interventions are no longer there, except maybe like Russia, for example. But otherwise, I think there's a more upcoming trend of warfare being changed. Now it's more about the gray zone tactics that China espouses in these regions. And will that Taiwan being the biggest example of this tactics. And I think the strategies to sort of overcome this would be definitely first the defense treaty of minilaterals. I think minilaterals are very, very crucial in this sort of tactics. Example of the RAA, which is the Reciprocal Access Agreement between Japan and Philippines itself, between their defense treaties. And also, apart from that, I feel that more minilaterals like Quad and Squad are also emerging to sort of counter this aggressiveness that China espouses in South China Sea, for example. So in my assessment, I feel that there is a serious threat of escalations happening, and the emergence of new contact warfare is happening definitely, which is non-contact.
Good points. Yeah. So it may not be all-out war, but you're saying war by other means, gray zone
Precisely.
tactics, salami slicing and pushback. And you're also talking about deterrence. And you're saying that if sufficient walls of deterrence are built, then it may prevent war. That's the theory, right? I mean, but you have seen many parts of the world where deterrence has broken down or is not working, And revisionist powers think that the offensive has the advantage. And they can go and attack because the deterrence to stop them is not as strong, So Indo-Pacific also, there are doubts. I mean, if China invades Taiwan, one of the flashpoints that you mentioned, will the United States actually fight to rescue and save Taiwan or not? There are different viewpoints on this, different signals. Biden administration gave a different set of signals. Trump administration, we have to see how robustly they could defend and support these minilaterals, in the region. And what is China seeing, from their side? From cost-benefit analysis, is it more beneficial to attack and take over Taiwan right now? Or is it costlier? It's a classic rational choice type of a question, right, in the Indo-Pacific. More viewpoints on Indo-Pacific and whether war is possible. Yes, please.
I see Indo-Pacific as a theater where there are a lot of growing ambitions, and a lot of growing economies. So everybody has their ideological ambitions to put forward. And yes, it is indeed a really war-prone theater. And some of the major flashpoints could be the South China Sea, which is a major global trade route. Other is Taiwan, as mentioned in earlier discussions. And Taiwan is the major flashpoint that could emerge into war, as Taiwan is the main player in semiconductor technology, and the world wouldn't want this technology to be hampered, since we have seen such global shortage during the pandemic times. So
Yeah, so Taiwan is a likely flashpoint. South China Sea, yes. Even the Himalayas, South Asia, we've had clashes with China before, and even though there is an attempt for a rapprochement, we have to see, because there's a long history of Chinese encroachment and infiltration attempts. So we have to be very watchful. Okay, let's move on from the Indo-Pacific and look at other parts of the world as well. Now, the region that is most often in the news for wars and conflicts endlessly is West Asia or the Middle East, right? And the most recent round of warfare between Israel and Palestinian groups, and also the Lebanese Hezbollah and the Iranian proxies in the region, it was a region-wide war and continues to be so. And this one, of course, has been devastating and one of the worst by the bloody history of that region. This is one of the worst spells that we are seeing. And the fact that, great powers have either supported one side or the other, or are actually probably not interested in settling this war, is something that we have all been observing, right? So here, really the question is, what is fueling this endless spiral of warfare in this region? I mean, you can go back in history and say it's all about, the creation of Israel and the dispute since 1949. They've had so many wars. You're right, but then what is driving the current, uptick in violence there? And what can we do for security and to restore some kind of a balance or deterrence in that region? It seems to have completely collapsed. You have wars, you have terrorist groups, and you have excessive use of force and a lot of destruction that's happening. Tens of thousands of people have already been killed in the most recent flare-up of the last couple of years. And there seems to be no limit to the kind of violence that we are seeing, right? So I'd like you to come in and talk about this region and what is happening there, and how can we find some semblance of coexistence of all those different religious groups and nation states and different powers that are vying for influence in the Middle East. Yes, please.
Hello, sir. My name is Sarthak. I'm studying diplomacy and foreign policy. I'm a sophomore. So talk about West Asia, it becomes a region not only of conquest, but also contest in terms of how, resources in the world define how realist philosophies of countries work, right? Within that specific area, you see that, America's conquest for oil, you'll see many countries divulging themselves in order to gain specific territorial interests. But more than that, we see that it becomes an area which becomes a battleground for major powers. You see that it's a hotspot for territorial or just ideological war between the East and the West, and it's been recurring since the 1940s, so to say. Within the specific context of Israel, we see them having an alternate view of what greater Israel should be, in contrast to what their neighbors might assume. And in between all of that, it becomes really, again, a contest of realist philosophies as to what I think is my strategic interest. on the other hand, to peacefully coexist within that region, I think we've spoken about multilateralism already before, but I think very effective multilateralism has to come in the sense that we need to redefine the ambiguous spots in how we've internationally legislated over the years. I definitely feel that anarchy exists, but I mean the contrast to anarchy is in fact having an international order that is rules-based but is not being effected in the best way possible right now. To see how various centers in the world play out, we are seeing that multilateralism is not being able to contain them because of stalemates, and these stalemates require revisionist solutions. With these require intent, political will from all the member states of different intergovernmental organizations. Definitely for those reasons, the West Asian theater becomes one of contest, but definitely a lot of hope that we can see coming in is from these very nations coming in and employing the best humanitarian measures possible. I know with the withdrawal of US aid, a lot of this is in question right now, but then a lot of it is also primarily based out of how you look at the best ways of multilateral institutions developing, so to say, their best employments possible in order to contain humanitarian crises out there. It's not only a center for contest, but what I feel is a center for opportunity in the years to come.
Yeah, I mean, that's a complex response and points well taken. But interestingly, you mentioned the oil and the resources. I mean, at one time that used to be the main bone of contention. Less so today. I mean, the United States actually is competing with Saudi Arabia and with Iran and with all the others in the global oil market. So there was a time when the US used to rely on allies in the Middle East for steady supply of oil. No longer so, but still the Israel factor. These are intrinsically tied to the US politics and they continue to be involved there. But also what China and Russia are doing there is interesting because they have been opposing it. So you said Western versus non-Western. That classic division still seems to exist in that region, although not as overtly as during the Cold War period. At that time, Soviet Union always used to back the Palestinians and the US always used to back the Israelis. But now it's more diverse. Okay, any other thoughts on West Asia? Extremism and terrorism, this is also an issue. It's not just the wars. Would someone want to speak about that factor and what we can do to try and mitigate it at least to some extent? Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Akshara, first year student of Global Affairs. I believe that all the rivalries that's happening in the region is deep-rooted in the history itself. First of all, the agreement which happened in 1916, it arbitrarily divided all the region, irrespective of the religion or the ethnic situations. Also, due to that, there was divide between Shia and Sunni Muslim, and then there is a factor of religion extremism. And I think these are the all factors which collectively lead to the intra-regional wars. And another factor also comes in where is this religion extremism, which is also one factor which led to terrorism. And also all these countries were just left with themselves at one point of time, due to which many extreme regimes came in and took control, military power took control, and they couldn't have a good leader which could lead them in the world power. And that's when the great powers come in, Russia, US, and they try to exert their influence through using these regions as a pawn. And amidst this whole chaos of the world power and the conflict, these regions become
right. A good point. Victims. I mean, the regimes and the type of regimes and leadership, many of these are very fragile also, and regime insecurity also fuels wars in the regions. Especially Iran versus Israel, which is the main so-called local Cold War there. These two big powers, regional powers. There is regime insecurity in both countries, although Iran is an authoritarian and Israel is a democracy, but still there is there are domestic factors fueling their rivalry and intense clashes. Okay, let's move on from the Middle East and let's go to another theater. Now, people thought this would be the last place on earth where there would be a massive, land war, but we are now seeing it every day with our own eyes. This is Europe. This was supposed to have, all become a unified whole and leading some kind of a, permanent peace and existing in a highly integrated economic order with a lot of cross-border benefits, and supranational entity, the European Union has been created. So there was all this optimism that this was going to become a alternative power center to the US and to China. And now you see they are embroiled in this war, the worst war since 1945, in terms of casualty, in terms of destruction. The whole place like a demolition site, Ukraine. So let's talk about this. I mean, why did peace break down in Europe? And what is the fundamental reason for this? I mean, there are different arguments. The Russians have their version of what happened. The Europeans and the Americans have a different version. But something gave in. There were all these commitments or agreements or understandings that we will maintain some order, and all those understandings fell apart. And now we are witnessing limited bloodshed and violence. So let's talk about what happened in Europe. Why did geopolitics return with such a forceful, vengeance in Europe, when we thought that Europe had solved these problems and had moved to a higher level of existence? Anyone on the European theater? Yes, please.
Hello, Professor. I'm Shashank, second year master's student. I'm pursuing my master's in diplomacy, law and business. Answering to your question that why the war has returned to Europe, as they were trying to establish a utopian society that has overcome the war and has an alternative to China and US. The thing is that they were not very inclusive. Like Ukraine was not part of European Union, and they were in the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problem. The world's problems are not the Europe's problem. That it's a statement by our honorable foreign minister as Yashankar. So they were not very inclusive, and the European Union that was the part of this was not able to solve to this problem. So that Brexit happened. And they were not very inclusive, and also they did not spend on their own security. Like they were dependent on US for their security. And now after the return of Trump in the White House, as he's withdrawing from the continent, they are witnessing a crisis, defense crisis. That now what? As US has left Ukraine on its own. Now they fear for their own security. So the future of Europe and its security depends upon themselves. That now they would have to increase their defense, and now they would have to turn away from the US. So they might look towards India too for their defense programs. So yes, it is very uncertain that what will happen in the continent, and they are trying to mitigate. Now Germany is spending, and European Union has come up with a budget of $800 billion that they would be spending on the defense. So that's it, Professor.
Right. Yeah, I mean, EU inclusivity and Ukraine hanging somewhere in the middle, no membership, but it's on the pathway to membership forever. The same with NATO also, right? For a long time, it was not brought in, and now Ukraine seems to be paying a very heavy price for the indecisiveness on the part of the West. Any other reasons you think are why Europe has been torn apart like this, and why can't? I mean, there was a time in the post-Cold War period, they used to say Vancouver to Vladivostok. Transatlantic was not just US and EU, or Canada, US and EU. It was supposed to stretch all the way up to Russia. And all of them were supposed to become part of one great, common family. But now all those hopes have just been, left to ruins. So why did that idea of a collective security where everybody can get along in Europe, Eastern Europe, why did that just break down? No? That's something, it's a very fundamental thing for us to reflect on. Yes, please.
My regards, sir. I am Shaina Arora, and I am pursuing Masters in Diplomacy, Law and Business. So, sir, I think that this chaos is because of a shift in system, where there was a liberal system, where we were slightly inclined towards liberalism, and now we're coming to a realist world where states' main aim is to expansion. And I believe that states put their interest first and not anybody else's. The second thing I think is that there is a trust deficit, and there is institutional fugitive that is happening, and that is the key challenge now. And why Ukraine is not able to sustain peace is because there's an institutional failure, maybe of NATO, and why NATO was backed by US, and US is slowly withdrawing from it. So I think that is the major problem. And secondly, what we need to think right now is that we need to move from a zero-sum thinking to a cooperative security framework, which will be more helpful in, I think, sustaining peace in what is happening in US right now.
Yeah, but easier said than done, right? I mean, to move from zero-sum to cooperative thinking, especially with this nationalism and this hyper-nationalism that we're talking about, seems to be very difficult, right? I mean, that's really the challenge. In fact, before every major world war also, or major power war, that was the problem, you know. Instead of cooperating, they went the other way and nobody could stop the spiral, the downward spiral. And it remains to be seen whether even Donald Trump's efforts to, you know, quote unquote, appease Vladimir Putin will work, you know. I don't think, because there's so many factors that it's not just the Western sanctions and all those things. There are many other factors that seem to be tearing them apart. And probably the biggest factor, in my view, which people don't talk about, is the Chinese backing for Russia. If there was no Chinese backing for Russia, Russia would not have the chutzpah to actually challenge the entire Western order. You know, so the dependence of Russia on China is so high now. That's what makes them, their war machine going, you know. So why can't there just be a grand bargain between China and the US? They are supposed to, you know, during the Cold War period, they used to call it strategic stability, where they used to have summits. Soviet leaders and American leaders frequently used to have summits, dozens of summits during the Cold War period. And they would like have, you know, talks about arms control, nuclear weapons, missiles, you know, no-go areas, and drawing the lines as about where each side can push and all those things. And it managed the without going to a hot war. It managed things for a while, strategic stability. Now, maybe there's a need for new kind of strategic stability, China-US dialogue, although the rivalry is very fierce. And from the Chinese point of view, I think it's very ideological also. They think of this as, you know, decadent Western capitalism, and that their time is coming to be number one and to dominate. So I don't think they're going to be willing to play any second fiddle to the US in any way, isn't it? So, okay, we have spoken about number of theaters, but let me take you to another aspect of geopolitics which concerns all of us, especially in the developing world. We have a lot of contestation over spaces in Africa, in Latin America, and poorer parts of Asia, not just the Indo-Pacific. And here, great powers as well as regional powers are throwing their weight around, either through economic means or through military means or through interventions or through, you know, covert operations. And you see that there is also greater sense of rivalry, especially between China and the US. You see that in many parts of the world where the Americans are saying, oh, we lost to the Chinese came in and now we have to push them back, you know? And what does it mean? Like you saw it with the case of Panama, a small country in Central America where the Chinese had come in and taken major stakes, and then the Trump administration forcefully tried to you know, eject the Chinese from there by applying pressure on Panama, and Panama ultimately succumbed to US pressure. And now the Chinese contracts have been cancelled. So you see that kind of, you know, intense rivalry in the global south, in smaller countries. And that's a classic symptom of Cold War, or what we are now calling New Cold War, right? So if you're a small country and you're facing this big pressure from different sides, what do? Do you, what we call bandwagon, or succumb to one of the powers and take the protection? Or you play both sides, one against the other, and try to get benefits from both? What is your strategy if you are a small country? And mind you, there are like 140, 150 countries of the world today in the UN, which can be considered to be small powers. So we're talking about a large section of the international community that is now facing this big systemic problem where the Chinese are muscling in, to some extent Russians in some part, not everywhere, but Chinese are everywhere. And the Americans are trying to push back. And there are regional powers, local powers in each continent that also don't want China or the US to be dominant, but they want their own influence there, right? So it's like a three-way contest that's happening. And what do you do as a small country or as a developing country? What are your options in this new Cold War? Yes, please.
Thank you, Professor. My name is Arugya Mohan Kafle. I am pursuing BA Honours in Global Affairs, and I myself belong from Nepal, which I believe is one of the foremost small power. And I'm trying to highlight the threefold strategy which Nepal has been implying in the international stage. So politically, what we are trying to do as a Nepal is to promote rules-based and value-based international order, which can really safeguard the interest of small powers like Nepal. And we have been doing it as largest troop contributor in the UN peacekeeping. So Nepal is the foremost peacekeeping contributor. So that's a kind of leverage we do have in the international system as a form of projecting our soft power capabilities as well. Economically, what we are trying to do is we will need, as a landlocked country, we'll need access to transit facilities. So we are trying to negotiate bilaterally and regionally with India and China to have a better access to sea and port facilities, better infrastructure and the connectivity. So that's the economic architecture. On the security realm, I think small states will require the stable and really projectable situation, and they will need more security assurance from the great power, and they normally applies whether hedging strategy or bandwagoning strategies with great power to protect their borders and to really protect their territorial integrity. But all in all, I think it's important for small power to have really equitable, rules-based and equal world order, which can really foster their interest in the multilateral fora.
Good. Yeah, so viewers, our student from Nepal is actually making sense from a point of view of a small country. They need to navigate this. It's a very tricky situation for them from their national interest point of view. They have to survive and they have to prosper. And how do you do it when there is pressure from different sides? So this is really, the art of diplomacy for a small state is to be able to navigate these very, very turbulent times. Any other views on small countries and what? Yes, please.
Hello, Professor. I'm Smriti. I'm from the MADLB, which is Diplomacy, Law and Business. I think today we can see Global South is gaining a lot more room. But the question is, are we playing by the rules of the great powers over here? Are they setting, are they defining? So right now what we can do, all the countries, especially Vietnam and India, that's what they're doing, is strategic hedging, where India is a part of Quad and BRICS. You create that strategic heading, you participate in more regional frameworks. There are so many minilateral and multilateral institutions that are rising today. And these help foster dialogue, these help you understand what the needs are of the Global South, and you can come together. It's about coalition together, it's about joining together. So I think these are some key points that can be added when it comes to strategic hedging, joining regional frameworks, and yes, these are some points that I wanted to.
Okay, good. Yeah, but you're talking about what can still be called middle to rising powers, right? I mean, India, Vietnam are not really small countries. Small states, have a bigger dilemma because even in coalitions, they don't have much weight, Middle power coalitions, yes. Then, for middle powers, it works out. And sometimes they align also, instead of hedging, they align because they have ambitions. Like India is aligning with the United States. There's no doubt about it, I don't think they're hedging because with China, there's no question of, non-alignment between China and the US for us. Anyway, more thoughts on Global South countries and yes, please.
Hi, Professor. My name is Chetna. I am from Masters from Diplomacy, Law and Business. And talking about the small countries handle great power competition in the Global South. I'm talking about the country like Vietnam and Bangladesh. They are attracting investments from both US and China. But they need to avoid becoming battle for larger powers. Normally, the smaller countries should stay neutral, avoid fully taking sides, and they need to build strong institutions and stable government, and they need to diversify relations, not depending on such one major power. And also use the competitions to their benefits by getting aid, investment, and trade from all sides. They need to be they need to be stronger, and also they need to pick their selves first.
Right. Yeah, I mean, those are tactics that we see with smaller powers. Any other thoughts on small countries? Someone who hasn't spoken yet? Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Simran Kaur. I'm a second year DFP student. So adding to the point above, like, does small countries, like Bangladesh, they have inter-conflict only, that between themselves only. And so this is something that they should avoid, because if you are already facing conflicts within yourself and already there are powers, like great powers, who want to influence you furthermore, it makes the situation worse for yourselves also. So I would suggest that, like during the Cold War time, India also, refused to choose sides and they formed their own, like NAM. So, small countries could use this and form their own, something like community, like groups to, prevent themselves from falling on one side, and also they should avoid conflicts within themselves. That is something I
Good
would
point.
suggest.
Yeah, many of these are fragile states with a lot of internal ethnic divisions and civil wars and such things, and that becomes, you are saying, it's a ripe for exploitation by outside powers who want to come in and use it to their advantage. The divisions, internal divisions. You're right. Okay, we've spoken about so many theaters, so many different hotspots and flashpoints. Now, as we come to the conclusion of the show, I want some of you to come in and talk about India's role here, because we are not sitting on the fence. We are a rising power, and Dr. Jaishankar, our external affairs minister, in fact, has said that great power rivalry creates opportunities for rising powers like India. And we are really, so for example, the alignment we have with the US, so-called the US strategic generosity, is tied to the fact that the US wants to counterbalance China. So we are supposed to be gaining from such things, from such rivalry. So what is India's role here? And obviously we cannot stop this turn to geopolitics. We have to also play the geopolitics. Right? There's just no question of saying, oh, I'm very moral and I will not play this nasty game of competition and struggle and conflict. We have to engage and we have to also push back, right? So where are we in this geopolitical chessboard, and what kind of power is India, you think, in this emerging geopolitical arena? Can we have someone who hasn't spoken yet, please? Yes, please.
Hello, sir. My name is Neil and I'm studying diplomacy and foreign policy. As we have studied and discussed about Indo-Pacific, there are many actors in Indo-Pacific also, and all their foreign policy have distinct actions, but India does not have a distinct action. Here we have to understand that even though India has capabilities of taking actions, but it cannot because of its own internal problems and border problems. India needs to foster a very technical diplomacy and try to bring in as much as money as possible to increase its capabilities and pursue its vision of becoming one of the petals, as you talked about in your book, one of the petals and cooperating with other petals of a lotus.
Okay, so you're saying we have to, yeah, of course, we have internal problems, but more importantly, in terms of external strategy, it has to be along with others. It has to be a plurilateral or a group-based response, because we don't have the capacities to challenge the great powers yet on our own unilaterally. Anyone else would like to come in on rising power, and what do rising powers do when there is geopolitical contestation? What are they supposed to do? Can we hear from someone who hasn't spoken? Yes, please.
Hello, Dr. Chaulia. I'm Calvin from MADLB, Masters in Diplomacy, Law and Business. I think what India is doing in terms of its minilateral initiatives and trilateral initiatives is one good thing, where they are doing interoperability with other countries, and the HADR operations are very good. However, we really need to work in the cyberspace and the electronic domain. Recently, we saw one C-130 aircraft which had gone to Myanmar and it came back, but there were interferences in its navigation systems, and that is kind of more of the modern warfare which we're going to be seeing today rather than the traditional aspects. So we really need to work in terms of that. Indigenization is happening, at a good pace in terms of the Navy. However, right now regarding the Air Force, the situation is a bit alarming, and we really need to work in those aspects in security when it comes to our country. Thank you.
Okay, so many of you are talking about capabilities and whether we have to augment capabilities. That's an obvious thing. I mean, rising power which wants to be a great power or a leading power, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi says, we can only achieve that by accumulating a lot more capabilities, and advanced military is one of those. We also need a giant and a booming civilian economy, and of course soft power initiatives and so on. To go back to the point about geopolitics, any last word on what India should be doing astutely in this geopolitical arena? What is it that we need to be doing? I mean, some of you are saying hedging, some of you are saying, aligning, some of you are saying counterbalancing. But these are all theoretical terms. Let's talk about the basics. There is no question of neutrality between China and the US, but we also want to be self-reliant and not dependent on the US. And certainly we are not an ally of the US. So how do we avoid war ourselves? We have talked about war all over the place, right? And there's if there is likelihood of war over Taiwan or over somewhere in the Middle East or in Africa or in Europe, there's also likelihood of war here. So what do we do about that? And isn't that the fundamental dilemma for us with geopolitics? How do we navigate this position and avoid war as we grow?
Greetings, Professor. My name is Ravi Rawat. I'm pursuing BA Honours in Global Affairs. In terms of avoiding war, coming to the economic capabilities, once India has that economic potential and it projects itself as an economic powerhouse, there would be a different perception of other countries observing India as an economic prowess, where it would automatically decrease that perception of having any conflicts with that particular country itself. Secondly, any country that has a military infrastructure as well. For India, it's growing, but at a little slower pace. If India and its government fixes this particular aspect overall, it would definitely also, I would say, project the country overall.
Okay, it's good. So you're all saying that we need to be stronger, and that's how people will respect us more. And you're also saying that if we are a bigger economy, then people will avoid conflict with us. I'm not so sure about that, because economic interdependence does not guarantee avoidance of war. And there have been many cases where highly economically interdependent countries have broken apart. We are seeing that now with the US also, with decoupling with China. But anyway, the sum of this discussion, viewers, with students of OP Jindal Global University, is that we are in a very, very fraught times with a great deal of uncertainty, fear, and insecurity. Geopolitics is, creating a worldwide sense of fear and foreboding as to what might happen next. And preparedness, deterrence, coalitions, alignment, hedging, there are like all kinds of strategies that our students have been speaking about. But we are not sure what will actually work on the ground. And at the end of the day, I think engagement with adversaries as well as with allies or partners in a continuous way. Sustained diplomacy is probably one way in which we can prevent this geopolitical turn from becoming deadlier and which could lead us into regional and more regional and or even world wars. So the way to manage this, it seems, the students are saying, is a combination of different factors. It is complex, everything is complex, but then, we also need to come down to that one or two basic elements that can sustain the order from total collapse. This new order, or the new Cold War period, as many are calling it, is not going to be pretty. It's not for faint-hearted, and it's certainly not going to look as rosy and as optimistic as the post-Cold War period was. And it's incumbent upon us, especially rising powers like India, to understand this situation, to read the geopolitical tea leaves correctly, to make the right calls. Because if you make the wrong call on who you want to align with or who you want to hedge with, you may end up paying a very heavy price in this kind of environment where people are resorting to force. Many countries are resorting to force, including outright invasions and such things. So it's very important that we keep our eyes continuously on this geopolitical arena, study it carefully, and understand the different nuances and dimensions and the complexities. And that's what we've tried to bring to you today. I hope you've enjoyed this, and thank you, students of OP Jindal Global University, for joining me on this show, and very well done.